people of the United States. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Hello, and welcome to George Washington Slept Here, a new civic education podcast from Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge, where we explore American history, civic education, and the idea of liberty through conversations with some of our favorite thinkers, writers, and leaders. I'm Jason Rea, Chief Operating Officer at Freedom's Foundation, and this week's host of George Washington Slept Here. In our new civic education podcast, the format is simple, a long-form conversation with a friend of Freedom's Foundation, where we can learn something new. Before we go anywhere, a little housekeeping. We encourage everyone to subscribe to George Washington Slept Here wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you get every new podcast as soon as possible. We love hearing from our listeners, so please email us at gwshpodcast@gmail.com with your comments, questions, or suggestions, and hit us up at Freedom's Foundation social media at FFVF on Twitter, and on Facebook and Instagram at Freedom's Foundation. Today's interview is with Freedom's Foundation friend and VFW Director of Programs, Lynn Rolf. Hello, Lynn.
Hey, Jay. How are you?
I'm great. Glad to have you here today. So our conversation is going to be pretty structured as a way to keep ourselves on track. We want to explore your origin story. How did you become the person sitting here before us? Your current work and what is taking up the bulk of your time. Then I want to talk about the state of America today, and particularly what concerns veterans most today. And finally, we will end with a quiz, thing you need to prepare for, but something where hopefully our listeners will learn something a little bit more about you. So, your origin story. Tell us, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Colorado Springs, Colorado, a military brat. I'm a product of the Vietnam War.
Okay.
Proud to say, son of a Vietnam vet, and grew up all around the world, following my dad as he got different assignments.
So Colorado Springs, Fort Carson?
Yep.
Okay.
And I haven't been back since. And I've been trying to get back. Fiance just went out to Denver for a motocross event with her son, and I was hurt I had to travel. So
where else did you live?
Germany quite a bit.
Okay.
My dad, probably half the career over in Germany. And then came back to Fort Riley, which I happened to also get stationed there, so that was extra special for me. And then 3 times at Fort Leavenworth, where I currently reside. West Point, New York, where my dad went to military academy. We went back when I was a youngster. Pretty much the big ones.
Okay. Fort Leavenworth, where you live currently.
Outside the wall.
Outside of. I know there was a neighbor of yours who is fairly well known amongst Vietnam veterans. His son and you became friends, and he became a pretty big influence on your life. And that's Medal of Honor recipient Roger Donlin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Roger and growing up with Roger?
Yeah, it did not hit me until I'd actually graduated high school and was getting sworn in the military as a young officer, his story and what he was. I grew up with both his sons played soccer. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we just lost Justin, one of his sons, just in the past year, and that hurt big time. But when I was getting sworn in, Roger came down the day I was getting my butter bars put on by my dad, and I looked down and was like, wow. And then I got his book. It's like, man, the whole time. We used to sneak over, and Norma always laughs when she sees me, that me and Derek would play hooky and go over the house and get into trouble a little bit when they were going out on his tour. But growing up with them was unbeknownst to me, probably shaped all my interactions with Roger, potentially into who I became, other than my dad's example, who I was as a military officer because of Roger.
And for those who don't know, Roger Donlin was the first Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam, commanded Special Forces as well as local Vietnamese soldiers as well when they were attacked. And he is. I met him 4 or 5 years ago. He and Norma came out here to Freedom's Foundation. We did a program on Vietnam and for teachers, and he came and spoke about his experience, and just the nicest, most wonderful guy. You would not, in meeting him, understand, that this is, this is the movie icon Army soldier. I mean, he's the Rambo. He's that's who he was. But I mean, just a genuinely kind person. And Norma, his wife, is wonderful. And she talked about her experience of growing up in a Japanese internment camp, and but they were good people, and I can understand why he would have been such an influence on you.
Very humble, very. Like I said, growing up with him, didn't even know.
Yeah.
So
he wasn't showing that off. He was who he was, and it's about character, and it's about who you are, and Roger demonstrates that very much so. So obviously you have these two monumental influences, your father and Roger Donlin. Tell us about your decision to join the Army yourself.
Yeah, so my dad told me he'd give me a year paying for college tuition. I thought I was going to wrestle my whole time, and got a little sidetracked a little bit, and Dad said, well, your year's up. If you want to stay in school, you got to figure out how to pay for it and get a scholarship. And it just happened to be one day I was walking back from class. I saw the ROTC department sign. I said, grew up in the military. Let me go see what this is about. And I talked to a young captain there. And I told him, my upbringing. And I said I wasn't quite sure, but I was researching, and kind of talked to me about the requirements, and said that I would have a hard time getting the scholarship because my grades are so low. It took me a couple years to pass college algebra. So GPA was not the best. But I competed for a scholarship and eventually went to Fort Lewis for camp and got a commission as a military police officer. And it was always the joke with my friends in college that
you were the troublemaker who was now the police officer.
And I become because they told me there was no way I could ever become a military police officer. It was one of the most competitive at the time because it's such a small branch.
Right.
And I got selected, and it totally changed my life. And now, of course, Dad being a cavalry officer, first went to Korea for a year. Because growing up, everyone wanted to go to all these big installations I had already been to.
Right.
And there was an opportunity to go to Korea, and I was like, I've never been there. I'll go. Best assignment that I had, just to see a whole other piece of the world, learn their culture.
And so that's the demilitarized zone between North Korea, South Korea. It is one of the tensest duty stations.
My first meeting I had was up in the Yuan compound to meet my future boss, and I'm standing there, and I felt something. It was a weird feeling on the back of my neck. Turned around, I seen a North Korean soldier peering in the window late at night at me.
Wow!
I turned around, I was like, "Oh, this is real."
Yeah.
And then the colonel looked right at me, he goes, "Son, we're just a speed bump."
Wow!
And to hear that, already nervous, but to internalize that and truly understand what he meant, it was a pretty big eye-opening experience and a sense of responsibility what I had for the Korean populace, us, my soldiers that I had. That was like, well, if we're considered a speed bump, let's try to prevent that.
Right. That changes, how you interact.
Yep, absolutely.
I've known a couple of people. I actually met a what potentially was one of your, though I think different time period, a compatriot of yours from the Republic of Korea's army who was stationed at one point there. And talk about the cooperation with local Korean soldiers.
It hand in hand. There's two. You have the normal military like we're used to. And then you have conscription service. We call them KATUSAs, Korean augmentees to the United States Army. Mm-hmm. And they would come in for a couple of years and work with us in our units. And then, of course, you had the whole ROC military. Everything we did was side by side. Mm-hmm. All of our training, all of our events. Because it had to be. I mean, we were still, technically to this day, we're still, there's no peace treaty signed.
Right. It's just the armistice.
So at any moment, if the guy up north decided to do something and come across or do something, at any moment we'd have to be ready. And our commitment to the Korean Peninsula was to keep it safe. So everything we did, and their cultures is like on the Arabic side, it's foreign to us.
Right.
So we had to make sure that we weren't doing certain things and had to learn. So you have no choice but to work together. And
right. And you want to be, we're there for a purpose, and we're the U.S. soldiers are there at the request of the Korean government, mm-hmm. and have been since the war. But there needs to be a genuine respect for local custom, for local
Absolutely.
Beliefs, and I imagine, especially with those who are, that segment of the population who are annoyed that we're there at all. And so you guys are playing that out every time you go out into public, I imagine.
Probably the best way to kind of summarize that, most of the country all really appreciates everything. You have certain pockets, especially in Seoul, mm-hmm. just because of the huge demographic.
Right.
That there was a lot of protests that my guys, as military police, would have to respond to with the Korean police and the Korean military, just to make sure that they weren't damaging our property,
right,
and protecting our families and the other military units there that were doing their day job, but we were keeping them safe from. Yeah, that was a very interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, here we are trying to help you, and you're fighting us.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, here you are, and all of your men have taken this oath to defend the Constitution, and in that is this idea of free speech and assembly and protest. And so, there is this, you want to protect everyone and keep everyone safe, but at the same time allow them to give voice to their protest in the same way that Americans are entitled
and
to
give. And as a young military officer and I pretty much lived a sheltered life being a brat. That was really my first exposure to true freedom. That they could express, and
right,
and everything that we fight for ourselves, for our own people. And it really, like, the light bulb clicked on. Is like, you know what? We're here to protect them, us, and help them fight for their rights.
Correct.
Just like we would.
Right.
So it was.
Yeah, it's a way of life that you're defending.
Absolutely.
And but I find that fascinating that. That soldiers like yourself who have taken this oath to defend the Constitution sometimes are put in that position where what you're defending is people, protesting you.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a tough position to be in, and yet know that there's a value there, that's really valuable.
Yeah, once you really understand it and see it and feel it, and everything, it's a no-brainer. It's like, you know what? I may not agree with you, but I'm going to fight for you.
Yeah. So how long were you in the military? Where else did you serve?
Just shy of 10 years. When I left Korea, I went to Fort Leonard Wood, and I had a basic training unit and an advanced military police training unit for about 3 years. Then I went to my advanced military police training as a young officer. And right when 9/11 happened, I was scheduled to go to Fort Riley. I just graduated the officer advanced course. And we watched the towers go down during our graduation.
Wow.
And I called my dad. I said, we're being told to go. So I drove from Fort Leonard Wood to Fort Leavenworth, where my dad was retired and still working on base. So I'm going to drop some things, and I got to get to my unit over Riley, and took over a logistics piece of the military police battalion to help really fortify Fort Riley. And
so was that the first step? Was we don't know if this is the first of many, and so we need to secure.
Yeah, it was just, first of all, hunker down, protect the base first and foremost, because we don't know, what the next piece is. And then we started ramping up training for whatever may happen.
Right, because at that point we had no idea. We just knew, but you knew. You as in the military knew you guys were going to be involved somewhere, somehow, and you needed to be ready.
Yep, because everyone needs a good military police unit.
Right, right. Wherever you go, wherever you wind up.
We knew odds are one of the units were probably going to go pretty fast wherever it happened. And then it was about a year and a half. I ended up taking over a military police company. And when that happened, it was probably about 3 months before Iraq kicked off. Of course, Afghanistan had been going on.
Right.
Sister unit went to Afghanistan, and we were the next in the chute. And as soon as we got the word, went through the planning process and went right over right there at the beginning of the invasion of Iraq.
Okay.
And helped to secure all the roads and started, and I always joke, I said, I started the first Iraqi highway patrol over there. It was like a little bit of, it was really hillbilly policing, just trying to teach them the pure basics, but we gave them as much as we could of training and said, hey, it's what we hope you do.
Right.
Sometimes they would do it, sometimes they wouldn't, and then.
So a lot of what you were doing was training locals eventually to succeed you.
Yep. That was the first initial, and eventually it came back to being that.
Right.
And then, of course, we went through the rush and the insurgency, and we were just trying to find the deck of cards and protect one of our roles as military police. All the units that would be coming in, we would protect them as they were driving to get to wherever they were going.
Right.
That's one of our bread and butters is security.
Were you, or certainly I would assume units like you, were securing the green zone when that's being set up in Baghdad?
Yep. Absolutely.
As the place where senior staff are and the ambassadors and all of those functionaries are working. They needed a safe place to be able to do their jobs, and you guys are the ones who are providing that. Yeah,
my unit, not specifically, but one of my sister units in the main unit that I belonged to had the green zone in Baghdad, and my guys had security of radio relay points because our communications couldn't talk from Kuwait all the way up to Baghdad by radio. So my guys set up kind of like radio relay points.
Yep.
And we called it the 9/11 Sheriff's Net. So the soldiers, they drove up, if something happened, they would see my MPs on the side of the road and the frequency to call.
Okay.
To get 9/11, 911 response there.
Right.
So my guys are a lot of quick reaction to certain things, either a breakdown or attack or
before we get into VFW, I want to ask you about one more thing, and that's Team Rubicon, because I know you've been involved with them. I want you to give you the opportunity to tell people who they are, what they do, because I think they do great work.
Oh, yeah. Team Rubicon, and especially like right now with the tornadoes that just ripped through Texas and going through Georgia and Alabama. When a natural disaster happens, it's a group of veterans, and there's also civilian retired firefighters or firefighters that can take time off, paramedics. They are so highly organized and skilled, they're able to go in right away and help with recovery efforts or with the cleanup, give people the right response and be able to do a good assessment of the area. So when FEMA does come in, or the government finally starts figuring out more at the county level, of course, they're a huge asset. That's just veterans and those people that are just helping others. And it was a very powerful, because it brought me back to my military time. I've done 3 tornadoes with them early on, Nebraska, across Kansas. And just fun getting after and helping people, and who better else to get dirty and start slinging mud and.
Well, and I imagine that, but particularly for those who have come back from military service, particularly overseas, we've heard about, and I'm sure we will talk about how difficult that transition can be, to be able to apply those skills in service of not people 6,000 miles away, but people maybe in your own state or 2 states over or whatever. But being able to take that service to country and localize it with people who are just desperately in need of it.
Yeah, and it's different. It's different, but the same. And what I mean by the difference is that, you can do all this stuff overseas and helping other people, but when you are helping our own communities, it really hits home more.
Right.
I mean, there's more emotions involved and more stress, because not saying that we wouldn't do a better job for anyone other or anyone above anyone else, but it's just different when you're helping someone in your own town, same state, neighbors. You just go, we go the extra mile for sure.
Right, absolutely. And it's one of the things that, at least for Freedom's Foundation, sort of defines what it means to be a good citizen, a responsible citizen, is we talk about helping others, being generous, sharing, in this case, your skills, sharing what you're able to do to make somebody else's life better. And that for us just ticks a box that says, yep, you're doing it. This is what it means. This is what our system of government is dependent on, is this idea that people help other people in whatever way they can.
Yeah, within 20 minutes when I heard the Kansas tornado come through, which was 3 hours from me, I left the office, come home, told my dad, watch the dog. And I just sent out a quick email to people on work and said, hey, meet me in 2 hours at 7-Eleven, and if you got stuff you want to donate. Next thing you know, I had to go back to my dad's farm to get a trailer. Drove it down and insert Team Rubicon and ourselves and our efforts in a lot faster than
right.
It was just pure luck on my part.
Yeah, but still, it's part of that is because you're bringing, that training and that experience as having served and being a veteran. So you come back from Iraq. You eventually leave the Army. You wind up at VFW. No.
I was lost. I thought when I made the decision to leave, I thought I could just hunt for the rest of my life and fish and stay away and just do what I thought I loved at the time, and really went down a dark tunnel for quite a while. Luckily, my dad reached out to some of his buddies that were working on base, and I got a job, working as a defense contractor. But I was not happy, still wrestling with a lot of history and demons. And Dad realized it, sat me down and talked at great length, and we started connecting with others. And one of my high school buddies had just gotten out too, young Marine. We're like, well, let's go. It was Veterans Day. Mm-hmm. We're down in Leavenworth, Kansas, one of the largest parades in the country. And we're standing there and seeing a sign for VFW. I looked down and I was like, well, my dad and my granddad belong. Let's go. It's like, I'm an Iraq vet. Let's go in.
Okay.
And that was the start. Got invited to a meeting couple weeks later. Kind of laughed. It was much older.
I was going to say, I imagine there was a fairly significant generation gap.
You would have thought when I first walked in, they're like, what do these two young punks want?
Right.
Because they're much, much older. A lot of Korean War vets.
Okay.
And at the time, there was a healthy population in World War II still.
Sure.
And we were the young guys that just walked off the street, and they weren't quite sure what to do with us.
Okay.
So I went to the meeting, and it's like, man, I think I can help out, because a lot of their struggles, they're complaining about communication. They were complaining about lack of involvement, and they want to do certain things and no connections with the fort. So, of course, some would call it a fatal mistake, and I would say it was my best mistake I made. I raised my hand.
You volunteered.
Said, hey, I can help with this. So I got friends all across Fort Leavenworth, and just got swallowed up in all the events and started learning more. And it's like, so I ended up taking over that post with just in a couple months, because they pretty much just left their hands up or raised their hand.
They were waiting for someone
absolutely
to succeed them.
Yep.
Yeah. They were just treading water.
Yep.
I think this is very common with membership organizations, with veteran service organizations, posts and chapters and what have you, that you have people who've done it for a long time, love the organization, have just devoted all kinds of time in their life to it, but are just ready to move on. And so they're just waiting for somebody like you.
Right. And then eventually I went to a district meeting, which was the next level up. Same thing happened. I raised my hand, and because no one was willing to step up.
Yeah.
So I took over the whole district, and I had the largest post in Kansas all at the same time.
Wow.
And then went to my first state meeting, and then was not happy with what I saw. It's like, I just wasted a lot of money for a hotel.
Yep.
Drove 4 hours across Kansas to go to this meeting. I need something out of this. Almost stepped away. And then I discovered that national headquarters was only an hour away. This whole time I had no idea.
You had no idea.
No idea.
It's over in Kansas City.
Yep. Just an hour from my cabin, and I went over and was like, I saw this, but shouldn't we? And they're like, yeah, we should be, but being each level being essentially, even though we have governing bylaws, each one's a franchise.
Right.
So it just depends on the people that are within those leadership roles to make the best out of what they can.
And it's a franchise made up of volunteers.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
we have
absolutely.
that same thing here at Freedom's Foundation. It's the constant mantra that these are volunteers. They are giving of their own free will to support you and to support the organization and support, in your case, fellow veterans. But they're volunteers. And so national headquarters supports all of those volunteers. And so at what point did you become part of the national staff?
From the time I first joined to the time I became state commander was 6 years.
Okay.
My year as state commander, I also took over, we call them conferences around the whole world. There's 4 conferences in the VFW. Kansas, believe it or not, belongs to the West.
Okay.
So essentially all the way to California to Asia. And I took over the role of the West chairman. And at the time, my predecessor was retiring. And I caught word of it. And my old boss, and he's since retired, called me and he says, "Hey, I have an opportunity." I was like, I said, "I've heard this before." And he mentioned to me, I was like, "Oh, whatever I can do."
Right.
So
fatal words.
Yeah.
Never more fatal words than whatever I can do.
And I knew what VFW programs were. And to me, that spoke to everything that I believed in. And I, of course, sent my resume, did a couple of interviews, and got hired about 9 years ago. And it's I've pretty much been the programs director just as long as I was in the military now.
Okay.
And to this day, of course, extremely proud of my service, but what I'm able to do now and the impact and potentially either the mentoring of everything I went through coming up in the VFW that I can share to some of the newer, younger members that are coming up now, because we're starting to see more Iraq and Afghanistan soldiers now joining. Us as an organization are in the upward climb now.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, we just hit, essentially we hit where we were at last year.
Okay.
And now we've grown from there. So a lot of positives and great energy coming through the VFW right now.
And not to be macabre, but the reality is we're losing World War II veterans at such a clip. That means you've got a significant number of new people coming into the organization for the first time ever, because they are not only replacing, but replacing plus those guys that you're losing every day.
Yeah, and with that, Korea and Vietnam too.
Yeah,
because the Vietnam vets have a whole nother set of situations with what they experienced in Vietnam with a lot of the Agent Orange and diseases and things that
jungle warfare.
Yeah, I mean it just it's ravaging through those veterans now. So we essentially have three generations that we're are losing and then trying to build back up from our generation.
Yeah. Well, that's great news about the growth. So you're here in Valley Forge because you are with one of your programs, Voice of Democracy, the audio essay contest. Last year you celebrated 75 years, which is amazing. I remember when I was in high school, I did the VOD, and I think I made it second at the, maybe I got beyond the post, but not very far. Certainly not to state, but one of the things that the students who go on to become the state winner is there is scholarship from VFW, and then there's the opportunity to come here to Valley Forge to do Spirit of America. So tell us all about Voice of Democracy Essay Contest, what it includes. Tell us about the scholarship, and tell us why VFW decided to do it all those years ago.
Yeah, so as an organization, we award well over $3 million. And it starts at the local level. Young student enters a voice recording based on a theme that's selected every year. And they compete at the local. Of course, they win a small scholarship there, then the county or district level, and then the state level. And when they win that, all of the states and then our 3 departments that are overseas all compete together at our level, national, for a chance to come to D.C. initially, which we spent a week of touring and educating them on the Capitol, but we'll give the national winner $35,000, and it goes down to the lowest amounts, $1,500 or $1,000. So everyone that wins at the state level at least gets some type of scholarship from us.
Right.
And then, as you stated, in the summer we get the extreme honor because a lot of kids do go to D.C. for school trips and family vacations, but they don't think about Valley Forge or
Philadelphia.
Really where everything started.
Yep. Well, we'd say that.
Yeah. So somehow the organization made the right decision way back, and I think it was in the early 80s or so.
I think that's right.
Decided to team with Freedom's Foundation because it goes to the question of the scholarship itself, the voice of democracy. And you and I have had tons of discussions on republic and democracy and First Amendment, and no better place but to culminate their whole experience than here,
right,
where the country founded and built itself, and then teach them a little bit about Valley Forge itself,
right.
With the George Washington and what we
Ike Eisenhower called it Valley Forge the crucible of democracy.
Yeah,
because that's where and of course the connection to VFW. That's where the military came to be. The ragtag group of volunteers who came together and faced down the redcoats, who were at the time the greatest army in the world. Happened right after Valley Forge.
Absolutely.
And it was because of the training and, and surviving winter and surviving the illness. And, 3,000 soldiers were lost to illness and weather. But those who, survived, they had been forged. And then they go out and they go to Monmouth and they nearly lose, but they don't. They fight them to a draw. And it's the last time they almost lose to the British.
Yep.
So, from the very beginning, the military has played an important role in maintaining our democracy, our republic. And yes, you and I have had the conversation about, is it a democracy? Is it a republic? I know you get questions all the time. Why is it in the voice of republic? And it's like, we all know a republic is a representative democracy. And yes, we are a republic based on the ideas of the Roman Republic. And certainly that's Ben Franklin's comment when he comes out of Independence Hall and they say, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? And he says, a republic, if you can keep it. So yes, we know that, but we also know that a republic is, and democracy was the word we used for generations. And certainly when VFW was founded, democracy was the word that we used. It's a general term, and that's how I like to talk, think about it is, this is the general term, republic is the specific term. And it's certainly not worth arguing over, because if we all are believers in freedom, either word works.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And freedom is the key to it.
Yep. And I love those discussions. Like,
absolutely,
this is exactly what we fought for, to have these discussions. And we just taught the kids downstairs about framing an argument versus getting in an argument.
Right. Sometimes you're forced to make changes. The gentleman who plays Mr. Adams is not available to do early morning stuff with us. So we made this change with Thomas Jefferson, and it's built around the Declaration of Independence and the idea of how do you make an argument, and this idea of how can you disagree without being disagreeable, because we know people, that people have fundamental beliefs that contrast, that are different, that, the question is, how do you do that and stick to your core belief, but engage with other people who may have different beliefs. And because that's certainly what the founders were doing.
Yep.
You know, one of the things I loved about the argument between Jefferson and Adams, or when we did it, you know, with Jefferson and Hamilton, is I remember two students walking out one year and going, I never realized how much they hated each other. You know, it's like the founders were not a monolith. The founders had different ideas and they disagreed vehemently and made those arguments. And yet, look what they accomplished. Yep. That what they were able to accomplish, you know, by setting aside, you know, the disagreement and finding the places where they did agree and the places where they knew this was what was best for the country, for this new country, and pursue that and worry about the other things later.
Yep.
And that meant some cans got kicked down the road, and they still do, you know, but it means that when we can find common ground, there are great things to be accomplished. If we can do a little bit of something to teach young people how to engage in a way that is respectful, and that's one of those key for us, those key principles, to be respectful of others and the rights and beliefs of others, and how we translate that in daily life is really, really important. Tell me anything. What other programs do you have? I know there's Patriots Pen.
Yeah, we've got a middle school which mirrors Voice Democracy. It's just a written essay, and it's the same exact process. We'll bring the national winner to D.C. I've got a big troop support program where I do financial assistance. We've got the largest student veteran scholarship for young service members. And then we have a military assistance program where we're able to help units. Because sometimes, as we know, with a lot of government entities, they got a very limited budget, and we're able to come in as a local VFW and help them, especially if they're getting ready to go overseas.
Right.
Like especially now over to Poland and
with Ukraine.
That whole interesting dynamic that's happening over there, that we're able to at least give them a little thank you first.
Right.
Help the family members know that, hey, while your service members over there, if you need something, you know, call your VFW. We're able to, especially if a family like loses a transmission or water heater blows up or something.
All those things that just that pop up, but now all of a sudden,
that maybe that person that's left back may not know how to handle or doesn't know the resources that are out there. At least they know they can get a hold of us. And if we can't help, we at least have the network that we can reach out.
You know somebody who can.
Yeah. So that's a big one. And of course, mental wellness program that we launched 7 years ago to reduce the stigma behind mental health conditions. That was near and dear to my heart based on my experience.
Yeah, I want to pause there because I mean it sort of transitioned us into what I wanted to talk about are the concerns of veterans today. But mental health, we talk about post-traumatic stress. We know there is a massive problem with suicide for returning veterans. Talk about what those difficulties are, what those problems are, and what is being done to help, but also what can people who are listening to this podcast do to help.
So, back when we first crafted the program, we did a deep dive with the VA to look at the notorious 22 or 20 or 18. Sometimes, it fluctuates so much, but we can't get focused on that number. It's just that we know that there's a crisis out there. And it's not just a veteran crisis. I mean, it's everyone's crisis.
Yeah. It's a young people,
especially coming out of COVID. Yeah, a lot of loneliness.
But that number that got bandied around a lot was 22 a day. Yep. 22 veterans a day were committing suicide.
Yep. And then when we did our deep dive, we saw that 16 of the 22 was based on not even being connected with the Veterans Administration for healthcare.
So they were just out there on their own.
Yeah, they were just sitting in a dark room, no friends, disconnected from everything. So we launched this campaign with our service officer program that can help them get benefits, get them enrolled in healthcare. Now, and I got it, the perception of the VA is that it's broken, which it's not. We as the VFW, we're their biggest fan because we help create the VA system, but we're also their biggest critic and very, very much hold them accountable. At least get some type of benefit and know the resources that are out there. And not everyone's going to do it, but we have some great partners. Dr. Barbara Van Dalen with Give an Hour is licensed practitioners that donate an hour a day to be able to help those vets that aren't willing or they don't trust the VA or they buy into some of the hype or the media sensationalization of the VA. So we have those resources there that can at least get the veteran some type of help. Now, what we also really discovered was the socioeconomic stressors is a big one also. So you do have the mental health piece, but a lot of times the mental health piece comes from they don't feel like they're able to take care of their family anymore, or they lost everything through some reason, or they're underemployed, or so with our programs from the financial aid management program we've got, our student veteran scholarship, we're able to at least get them back to even and then give them some goals.
Right.
So with our connections with Student Veterans of America and other groups, you give them more hope, something to live for, instead of making the fatal decision. And that's our goal as an organization, is just show the veteran that they matter first and foremost.
Right. And get them connected to other people.
Other resources, groups.
Yeah. Well, and that was, this goes back to previous generations where, that mental health stigma certainly was the rule. You didn't ever admit to anything. Yep. But I remember my great great uncle, my mother's uncle, who had served in World War II, like just about everybody else. And but he was a member of the VFW. And I remember a couple of times getting to go into the canteen. Yep. And it's still an image burned in my memory. But certainly those guys, the best they had was talking with somebody else and probably self-medicating at the canteen. And what you all are trying to do is something significantly more productive for young veterans than just that.
Absolutely. But we can't get to any of that until we find those vets that are totally disconnected. So everything that we can do with our networks in our community that we should be building with other like-minded entities, and then educating the public. So someone might just stumble by a booth or an event and they're like, oh, what's this about? They see it and they're like, oh, Susie's son he's struggling.
She was telling me about how much maybe this would help.
Yeah, so she's able to reach out and say, hey, connect her with her friend and say, hey, this might be a good thing for your son or daughter.
Right.
And then break that barrier that's down, and then the discussions can happen and figure out the right, what that right fit is to get that veteran or service member.
So I will start by saying I am not a veteran. I have not served. So I'm going to ask these questions definitely as an outsider. But I was raised to believe my father, my grandfather, served. So I've been raised to see military service as an honorable thing. I think most veterans see it as honorable, and
Absolutely.
yet they come home and there is this struggle to reconnect. What's that about?
I think being too humble, and maybe their experience sometimes could be great and wonderful. Sometimes something bad's happened and they've seen stuff and they don't want to be anywhere associated that could potentially remind them of what happened. Deal with it all the time myself. But I wouldn't have learned if I would not have had the support structure I stumbled upon by just happening to go in the VFW. So a lot of that, it's self-chosen to disconnect, so that way they're not reminded.
So they're trying to give themselves distance to something that happened, some experience.
But yes,
and
more than likely.
But what they're doing is they're putting distance between themselves and the people around them right now, in order to avoid. So, and then once you're isolated like that, it's
a dark hole.
Yeah, and you can't dig yourself out. It's
and that's why anything that any organization does is try to find within our concentric circles of safety that we've got to just grab someone new, and who knows who that person knows, and that ripple effect. Hopefully, we can find those vets that are out there, and even other people that just need help.
Right.
Doesn't have to be a vet. It can be anyone that's in a crisis. That a lot of great tools that are out there that we have to do better as Americans across our country because of I mentioned earlier about COVID. I mean, these young youth had a hard time.
Oh yeah.
So anything that we can do to help everyone, that's really all of our duty.
I'm glad you said it that way. It's it just brings me back to another one of our keys, our principles of civic responsibility is personal accountability.
Yep.
That you take. We don't wait for someone else to come fix the problem. And that's what always has impressed me about organizations like VFW, that this is veterans getting together to serve the best, the best interests of veterans. So tell us about what other concerns. Certainly, suicide prevention and helping veterans deal with post-traumatic stress is really important. What are the other major concerns that you're hearing from veterans as a national officer at VFW?
Really right now, and I'm looking at the best way to frame this with our, our federal government. Yeah, they did a great thing recently with compromise and came to a deal to fix the debt situation. But there's a lot of angst about, because there was some things thrown out there about veteran benefits being cut. And is the government really doing enough? And we of course say no. And a favorite saying that I've heard from a lot of past VFW members, that hey, they sent us off. We thought our government and our country should have the responsibility to make sure, since we got broke, anything you do to help us, please.
Well, and those kinds of things, which do seem pretty straightforward, get caught up in the political grind. And that's where I think a lot of us go, can we separate these things out? Yes, there are certain things we want to fight about that are policy and, Republican versus Democrat and all that kind of stuff. But then there are some other things like, what do we do for our veterans? We, as a nation, went to war. We sent this generation of soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen, and somewhere along the line they were hurt, they were broken, they received injuries. Don't we owe them to provide them with the best care that we can, and shouldn't that be fairly straightforward? You know, and I think that's a fair question for veterans and their families to ask. And we know everything's complicated. We know that there's all kinds of considerations, and it's certainly a consideration, or ought to be a consideration, when government decides we're going to send soldiers into a theater. I want us to consider that every time, whether that's Ukraine or Taiwan or some, other thing that's going on somewhere in the world. What are the consequences for those that we are going to send into the fight?
Yeah, and then, our simple things like military retirement, service member gets out, they'll get penalized if they draw a medical pension for their disability. They can't, there's a cap, and sometimes they lose money now because they've already earned their military retirement. But then you throw on the VA compensation, it's like, okay, that's a no-brainer. It's like, why, the service member earned 20 years of service.
It's a job. It's retirement. It has nothing to do with...
I've got an issue that I broke myself, and now I'm going to get penalized. So right now, that's one of our top legislative priorities right now is to fix the concurrent receipt, or the Major Richard Starr Act that's going through, and that's going to be a long battle. Yeah.
That's and dealing with the intricacies of government bureaucracy is fun for no one. Least of all veterans. So this has been a great conversation. We end every conversation with quiz. Absolutely. So I have a quiz for you here. So excluding Washington and Lincoln, who's your favorite president?
Because I've been coming to Freedom's Foundation so much, Jefferson has fascinated me so much.
He will be happy to hear it.
Yeah. Now, I've met a few presidents, through the service and what I've done, but I think I would have really liked to have hung out with Jefferson.
That's very cool. Let's see. What's one thing you would want every American to learn more about?
Flag protocol.
Ah, excellent. That's a big
one. That is a daily educational opportunity that I provide every day.
And it's one of those elements of civic education that used to be part of.
Yeah. And we've lost that.
You learned it somewhere. Whether you were in Scouts or whether you learned it at school or you learned it in some other thing, but you learned it, and now I can't think of where young people would learn it if they're not in scouting. Nope. And we've got to find some other places to do it. What pet peeve annoys you the most? I have a million of these, so I talk about them all the time. But any particular pet peeves?
When I see military uniforms in movies and they're so jacked up, we cannot get through anything, and it's like, because my drill sergeants that I had that worked for me just beat it into my head that, sir, this is the right way. And
right.
So my mind is, and I do it for the VFW. Anytime there's a military picture, I'm the guy that looks at it and says, okay, this is wrong, or this is good. That's first thing that popped in my head.
So this is to all those producers out there. If you're going to do a military movie, call Lynn Rolf at VFW. He'll make sure you get the uniforms right. That's a great one. Favorite movie?
Gardens of Stone.
Ooh, I don't know that.
Yep. It's got a lot of the old guys. James Caan. Darth Vader.
James Earl Jones? No.
Yeah, James Earl Jones. Yeah, he's the sergeant major.
Okay.
But it's all based at Arlington and the old guard.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check it out. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of my father's old favorite movies. So, including a lot of Clint Eastwood westerns, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Pale Rider, and Cool Hand Luke. And so that'd fit right in with those. So our final question that we ask every guest, it's a simple one: bourbon or scotch?
Bourbon.
Amen. Lynn, thank you for being such a great guest. I had such a great time chatting with you on the
my friend.
podcast today. I want to thank our producers, Laura Kennedy and Sarah Rasmussen. A special shout out to our friend of the pod, Bill Franz, for his art design on the logo. And special thanks also to longtime FFEF historic interpreter Bob Gleason for his contributions to the intro music. And most of all, I want to thank all of our listeners. Please subscribe, follow, rate, and review George Washington Slept Here wherever you listen to podcasts, and tell your friends. To learn more about Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge and the work that we do in civic education, please visit www.freedomsfoundation.org and follow us on social media or email us at gwshpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks and have a great day.